And welcome to the landmark 100th installment of KRAD COVID Readings, part 2 of that 100th installment. We are continuing with Many Splendors, which is my final Star Trek Starfleet Corps of Engineers novella. In the previous part, this story is flashing back to Sonya, Gomez, and Kieran Duffy's time on the U.S.S. Enterprise. The character of Gomez was introduced in Q Who and also appeared in Samaritan Snare. The character of Duffy was introduced in Hollow Pursuits, which was also the episode that introduced Reginald Barclay. We put them together on the U.S.S. Da Vinci and established that they had a relationship while they're on the Enterprise, and Many Splendors is finally chronicling that relationship, while also giving us an engine room's eye view of several events in Star Trek's second through fifth season. The first two chapters, which I read yesterday, took place during The Measure of a Man and during Contagion. The next three chapters I'm going to read today will take place during Pen Pals, and then during Q Who, which was when we first saw Sonya on screen, and then during Peak Performance at the end of the second season. So, without further ado, we continue with Many Splendors. Chapter 3. Captain's Log. Stardate 42737.3. It has been 6 weeks since our entrance into the Selkundi-Drema sector. Each system has revealed the same disturbing geological upheavals on every planet. Sonya was reading an article on her pad while exiting her bedroom and trying not to scream. "I don't believe this!" Leon was eating breakfast at the large table. Swallowing her steaming oatmeal, she asked, "Don't believe what?" "This idiot is writing an article on subspace accelerators." Frowning, Leon asked, "Didn't you write a paper on that?" before scooping more oatmeal into her mouth. "Yes, and this Dr. She touched the control to get the article header with the author's names. "Zerberso is talking through her fur. The magnetic containment unit she has will break down after the first time it's used, and her alignments are all completely off kilter. Anybody builds an SA to these specs is just asking for trouble. It's more likely than anything to just fall apart. I proved that in my paper, but she doesn't even cite it." Leanne shrugged. "So write to the journal and complain." Walking over to the replicator, Sonya shuddered and said, "Oh, I can't do that." To the replicator, she said, "Hot chocolate, please." "Why can't you?" "I'm just a Starfleet ensign. When I wrote the paper, I was a third-year cadet. Dr. Zerbersero is the leading authority on subspace at Thelian University. I couldn't just write in and say she's an idiot. I mean, sure, in our cabin, that's one thing, but I can't write a letter." She looked at Leon. "Can I?" Shaking her head, Leon said, "I don't understand you, Sonya. You're one of the brightest people I've ever met, and you push yourself to be better than the best, but you refuse to realize it." Sonya almost shrunk in her chair. "I'm not anything special." "Yes, you are." She held up a hand. "Forget it. I'm tired of beating my head against that particular wall. I have to go. Suntek and I are having breakfast." Staring at Leon's now empty bowl of oatmeal, Sonya asked, "So why did you just eat oatmeal?" "Because he wants to have a Vulcan breakfast. Vulcan food makes me gag. But he likes it, so I agreed and stocked up on oatmeal first." She smiled. "Hey, listen, what are you doing after your shift?" "Well, I've got to finish this journal, and then there's the paper I promised to John that I really need to finish. And I may wind up pulling a double if the Wunderkind's team asks for another sensor recalibration." "Oh, God, another one?" Leon rose from the table and laughed. "How many different ways can they scan these planets?" "I'm starting to think it's infinite." The young acting ensign, Wesley Crusher, had been put in charge of a team of Enterprise science officers to determine why all the planets in the Selkundi-Drema sector suffered from horrendous geological instability. The team hadn't made much progress, but it wasn't for lack of finding new and more interesting ways of scanning a planet's surface over the past several weeks. "In any event," Leanne said, "me and some others have been getting together in 10 Forward to chat and gossip and such. It's myself, Costa, Van Mater, and Allenby." Sonya vaguely recognized the other names. The first two were engineers, and Allenby was a shuttle pilot, maybe? But said only, "I don't have time, Leon, honest. It's just so much to do." Leon walked over to the replicator to recycle the oatmeal bowl. Shaking her head, she said, "Sonya, one of these days you need to relax. Maybe go on a date yourself. What about that Duffy guy?" Sonya blinked. She'd hardly thought about Duffy since the Iconian mess, and hadn't seen him except to pass in the corridor once or twice. "I don't know." "Well, you should still come to 10 Forward. For one thing," she said with a feral grin, "I've gotten some really good gossip. Do you know that Data's been talking to some girl on one of the Draymond planets?" Sonya looked askance at Leanne. "That's crazy. Isn't that a Prime Directive violation? Data isn't capable of that, is he?" Leon shrugged. He's sentient, remember? To my mind, that makes him capable of anything. Now it was Sonya's turn to grin. Weren't you the one saying he was just an android? Maybe I was wrong. Leon went to the door. I've got to get to breakfast. If you change your mind, we'll be in 10 forward at the corner table at 1930. With that, she left. Sighing, Sonya finished reading the doctor's article. When she was done, she thought on Leon's words. Perhaps she should write the letter. Perhaps she did need to slow down. And perhaps she should see how Kieran Duffy spent his off-duty time. The computer startled her out of her reverie. Ensign Gomez, you have received a communique from Belinda Gomez on Earth. Getting up and stretching, Sonya said, put it on the screen. She turned to face the wall with the view screen, which lit to life with the Federation logo, followed by the round face of Sonya's older sister. Hey, S, it's me. Just wanted to check in with you on your big old starship. I got your last letter, and I'm not sure what scares me more. First you say that your captain was duplicated, and the 3 of your crewmates were trapped in a recreation of a bad novel. Then you talk about those inspectors from the starbase checking over your work. The part that scares me is you didn't think the first part was that big a deal, but you wouldn't stop complaining about the second part. You're weird, S, you know that? Anyhow, all's well on the home front. Looks like we're going to the Federation Cup again this year. We've got one more game to go, but I'm pretty sure we'll be able to nail it down. We just have to beat the Stars tomorrow night, but their goalie's a pushover. I had dinner with Mommy and Poppy last night. They're doing well. Poppy says you don't write enough, but that just means you only write once a day. Anyhow, I gotta go. Talk to you later, S. Sonya shook her head. Belinda's soccer team was going to the Federation Cup. Again. The last time they played the Stars, Belinda scored all 3 goals in a 3-0 victory. And she got to see their parents more often being on Earth. All thoughts of acceding to Leon's request left her mind. She couldn't afford to take the time for letters to journals, or gossiping in 10 forward, or going on a date. Not when she had her sister, the famous soccer player, to live up to. When Sonya arrived in engineering for her shift, Clancy was waiting for her. I've got some news, Sonya. When we're done in Selkundi Drama, there'll be some changes. Sonya didn't like the sound of that at all. But don't worry, Clancy said quickly. They're good changes. There'll be some crew rotation is all. Ensign Gibson's transferring off, and I'm taking over beta shift at Khan. Sonya's eyes widened. You're getting bridge duty? Ella, that's great! Clancy smiled. She'd been bucking for bridge duty since before Sonya came on board. And you're getting bumped up, too. LaForge wants you on Alpha. Her stomach dropping, Sonya said, Alpha shift? It's a great opportunity, Clancy said, as if Sonya didn't know that. Oh, definitely. Absolutely. That'll be great. Sonya let out a breath as Clancy smiled at her and headed over to another part of engineering. This is going to be a disaster, Sonya thought, crestfallen. Working right under LaForge's nose? I'll never be able to live up to that standard. Excuse me, are you Ensign Clancy? Sonya looked up from the console to see the Wunderkind himself. No, I'm Ensign Gomez. Oh, sorry. Wesley Crusher. The young man offered his hand, and Sonya took it. He had a firm grip. I'm heading up a team looking into the geological instability, I know. Sonya said with a smile, what do you guys need this time? An Ica spectrogram. The problem is stellar cartography is using the starboard sensor array for their mapping, and if they stop what they're doing to give us the sensor nodes we need, they'll have to start over. Sonya chuckled. It sounded like the young man had been rehearsing that speech since before coming in here. Can you use the port array? The problem is I need 5 contiguous arrays to make it work, so I need to reassign nodes 4, 7, and 8 in order to give you guys enough to work with, right? The kid grinned. She couldn't help but grin back. The kid's enthusiasm was infectious. That's right! Thanks a lot, Ensign. I really appreciate it. It's not a problem, and call me Sonya. She felt ridiculous being called Ensign by this kid for some reason. Give me a few minutes to finish up what I'm doing here, and then I'm all yours. As Sonya completed the diagnostic she was in the middle of, she couldn't help but ask, why are you running an icogram anyhow? You think there's dilithium on these planets? There might be, yeah. Ensign Davies found indications of trachor deposits. Sonya nodded, and where there's trachor, there's dilithium. Makes sense. You definitely want to be as thorough as possible. Exactly what I said! Wesley got a wide-eyed look that Sonya had seen all too often in the mirror. Davies thought it might be a fool's echo, but Commander Riker put me in charge of finding out what's happening, and we've got to cover all our bases. Yeah, but... Sonya took one last look at the diagnostic, saw that it was compiling normally, then turned to face Wesley. Dilithium wouldn't explain this instability. I mean, you need more dilithium than there's ever been in one place, and not even Archer 9 has that much dilithium. Maybe. Wesley seemed a bit deflated. It might be a dead end, but we've got to be sure. Besides, it can't hurt to find out if there's another source of dilithium. True. Sonya smiled. All right, then. Let's go redistribute the sensors. Chapter 4. Memo from Ensign Esmeralda Clancy to Lieutenant Geordie LaForge, Stardate 42760.9. I believe that Ensign Sonya Gomez bears watching. She has one of the finest engineering minds I've ever seen, but she's in danger of burning herself out. She has tremendous drive, but to the exclusion of all else. I've never seen her in 10 forward. She's never booked leisure time on the holodeck. She's constantly working extra shifts, and I've never seen her socializing with anyone beyond her roommate. It's my recommendation that she be given more guidance than I've been able to provide. Alpha Shift hadn't been as bad as Sonya had feared. Although Geordie LaForge was a perfectionist, he wasn't an unreasonable one, and he never asked his people to do anything they couldn't. He was very hands-on, to the point where Sonya wondered why he bothered even having a staff, but he could delegate when it was called for. She also saw a lot more of Wesley Crusher. Although nominally assigned to the bridge as the Alpha Shift con officer, Wesley, partly in preparation for his academy studies, partly due to the kid's sheer brilliance, also did quite a bit of work in engineering. The icogram he'd requested had been the right call, as had Sonya's caveat. It would indeed take more dilithium than had ever been recorded to have it be the reason for the geologic stresses racking Selkundi Drema, but that's just what the icogram found on Drema 4. The Enterprise was also able to prevent that world from being destroyed, thus saving its native civilization. Sonya had heard a lot more rumors like the one Leanne told her about Data talking to a girl on the surface, and several people had said they saw Data walking the corridors with an alien child nobody recognized. But again, Sonya didn't put much stock in the rumors. She did, however, put stock in Wesley. The kid was the genuine article. They'd spoken a few times since she switched to Alpha, regularly interrupting each other and throwing ideas back and forth. When she had her first break on her third day on Alpha, she walked over to the replicator near the corridor entrance and requested a hot chocolate. Laughter from her left caused her to look up to see LaForge chuckling and walking over to her. We don't ordinarily say please to food dispensers around here. Sonya smiled. Leanne had said much the same thing when she ended her first dinner request with a please, and she gave LaForge the same answer she had given Leanne then. Well, since it's listed as intelligent circuitry, why not? However, with Leanne, she'd stopped there. Now she went on. After all, working with so much artificial intelligence can be dehumanizing, right? So why not combat that tendency with a little, simple courtesy? Turning to the replicator, she reached for the hot chocolate and said, thank you. For someone who just arrived, you certainly aren't shy with your opinions. As LaForge spoke, he walked into main engineering. Sonya absently followed him, gripping the hot chocolate with both hands and realizing she should have cut herself off. Leanne was used to her babbling, as was Ella, and Wesley had been babbling right back, but with LaForge? Have I been talking too much? No. LaForge said the word emphatically, but Sonya wasn't having any of it. Oh, I do have a tendency to have a bit of a motor mouth, especially when I'm excited. Or awake. And you don't know how exciting it is to have gotten this assignment. And then, suddenly, before her brain could tell her mouth to shut the hell up, her mouth barreled forward with the speech. Everyone in class, everyone wants the Enterprise. Want it, you idiot, you're not a cadet anymore. It would have been alright to spend some time on Rena 6, do phase work with antimatter. That's my specialty. I know, LaForge said. That's why you got this assignment. Sonya's stomach started doing cartwheels. He knows my specialty! Then she mentally berated herself. Of course he knows my specialty. He's the chief engineer. He doesn't just take people sight unseen. Shaking her head, she said, I did it again. It's just that... LaForge's voice was soothing. I know. You're excited. Look, Sonya. Eager to receive whatever wisdom the chief engineer was going to provide, she said, Yes? I don't think you want to be around these control stations with that hot chocolate, do you? She looked down at the hot chocolate as if seeing it for the first time. Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't even have this in engineering. It's just, we were talking, I forgot I had it in my hand. She started to back away from LaForge with almost the same speed with which she was digging herself into a hole verbally. Just shut up and walk away. I'm gonna go finish it over here. Realizing as she walked that probably wasn't the best way to end the conversation, she stopped, turned, and faced her CO. Lieutenant LaForge? He nodded. This is not going to happen again. Again, he nodded. Satisfied that she hadn't embarrassed herself too terribly much, and at the very least pulled it out at the end, as it were, she nodded back and turned around, intending to take the hot chocolate to the corridor. As she turned, she crashed right into someone wearing a red uniform. Great, that's all I need. Someone on the command track getting hot chocolate all over their uniform wasn't exactly going to help Sonya do better with LaForge. Then she looked up and saw the bald head, hawk nose, and stern expression of Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Sonya had, of course, seen the captain before. He'd come down to engineering once or twice, not as often as Commander Riker or Lieutenant Commander Data, and she'd passed him in the corridor. On the latter occasions, he had given her a nod and a curt ensign, obviously not knowing who she was personally, but able to discern the single pip on her uniform denoting her rank. This was, however, their first face-to-face encounter. And she spilled hot chocolate on him. She spilled a lot more on herself, but that somehow seemed not to matter so much. "Oh no! Oh, I'm sorry! Oh, Captain! Actually, it's my fault, sir." That was LaForge coming to her rescue. Great. First Duffy, now LaForge. Is everyone on the ship going to have to cover for me every time I do something stupid? "Indeed," said the captain, sounding dubious. Of course he sounds dubious, you idiot. Sonya started wiping at the captain's uniform with her hands. "Oh, I wasn't looking! It's all over you!" "Yes, Ensign, it's all over me," Picard said in a voice that could have frozen the hot chocolate, which, somehow, he was now holding in his right hand. "At least let me, sir," she said, still wiping at his uniform shirt. The captain grabbed her wrist with his left hand to arrest her futile attempts at drying him off. Ensign... Realizing he was making a request, Sonya straightened. Ensign Sonya Gomez." LaForge added, "Ensign Gomez is a recent Academy graduate, Captain. She just transferred over at Starbase 173. "Is that so?" the captain said to LaForge. Then he looked at Sonya with an expression that wasn't as harsh as Sonya feared it would be. "Well, Ensign Sonya Gomez, I think it would be simpler if I simply changed my uniform." "Captain," LaForge said emphatically, "I must accept full responsibility for this." "Yes, Chief Engineer, I think I understand." Picard looked at LaForge, then at Sonya. And then it happened again. Sonya's mouth took off at full run before her brain knew what was happening, and the rest of the speech, which had been cut off by LaForge telling her he knew her background, came pouring out. "I just want to say, sir, that I'm very excited about this assignment, and I promise to serve you and my ship, this ship, to the best of my abilities." "Yes, Ensign, I'm sure that you will." The captain didn't sound in the least bit sure, and Sonya couldn't really bring herself to blame him. "You don't call it my ship to the captain." Turning to depart, Picard said, "Carry on." Then he stopped, looked down at his right hand, and then offered the hot chocolate cup back to Sonya. Meekly, she took it, and the captain exited. Never, in her life, had Sonya Gomez more wanted the Earth to swallow her up. Except, of course, they were on a starship, so she'd have to settle for something else. A warp core breach, maybe? Oh my. She looked at LaForge, whose visor made it difficult to read his expression, which came to Sonya as something of a relief. "First impressions, right? Isn't that what they say? First impressions are the most important?" "I'll give you this. It's a meeting the captain won't soon forget." LaForge walked off. Sonya stood there for several seconds. My career is over. In the time it took Sonya to return to her quarters and change into a fresh uniform, the entire engine room was alive with gossip. Several people referred to her as the hot chocolate demon. Everyone cringed when she walked near the replicator, and she overheard Cliff Myers describing the spilling of hot chocolate as the Picard maneuver. By the time the lunch break rolled around, Sonya was about ready to crawl into the warp core. It was LaForge who again came to her rescue. "Sonya, how'd you like to get some lunch?" From behind him, Duffy said, "Don't let her order a hot chocolate, Geordi." Next to him was Denny, who snickered. "I'd like that very much, Lieutenant," Sonya said meekly. As they walked down the corridor toward the turbolift, Sonya said, "I can't begin to tell you how sorry I am, sir. If you want me to transfer off, now why would I do that?" LaForge chuckled. "If I transferred everyone who did something embarrassing, the engine room would be empty in a week. All I care about is the work, and your work is excellent. I read your graduating thesis. Now, I wouldn't have requested you if you weren't the best." Again, Sonya's stomach started turning cartwheels. She had no idea that LaForge had requested her, much less read her thesis. Looking down and smiling, she asked, "Where are we going?" 10 forward. We're going to forget about work. We're going to sit, talk, relax, look at the stars." He pointed a vaguely accusatory finger at her. "You need to learn how to slow down." It was the same thing Leanne had said to her on her first night, and she believed it even less now than she had then. "Oh, no. I can't do that." LaForge stopped walking. So did she. "You know, you're awfully young to be so driven." This was hardly the first time she'd heard those words, and she gave the lieutenant the same answer she always gave. "Yes, I am. I had to be. I had to be the best because only the best get to be here. Geordi..." She cut herself off, realizing she just committed the latest in a series of faux pas. "Lieutenant," she amended, lowering her head. "It's okay," LaForge said. And indeed, most of the people in the engine room referred to the lieutenant by his first name. But most of the people in the engine room hadn't spilled hot chocolate all over the captain, so she wasn't sure where her boundaries lay. "Go on." "Whatever is out here, we're going to be the first humans to see it. And I want to be a part of that. I want to understand it." "Sonya, relax." LaForge started walking again, and Sonya kept pace. You're here. You've made it. But you won't last long banging into walls. It'll be there for you, believe me. Okay, she said in a small voice. Look, I promise I won't let anything exciting slip past without letting you know, okay? Okay, she said with more authority. Okay. LaForge smiled as they entered the turbo lift. Deck 10. The lunch had been one of the most pleasant experiences of Sonya's career to date. One of the many reasons why Sonya had turned down Leanne's offers of eating here, or in the mess hall with other people, was that she had some bad memories of family dinners. It all depended, of course, on how Mommy and Poppy and Belinda were getting along. How Mommy and Belinda were getting along that week. When they were in one of their bad phases, Sonya felt as bad sitting at the dinner table as she had in engineering the entire morning. Those memories were hard to ignore. But LaForge was an easy conversationalist. He had Wesley's intelligence, but the ensign's useful enthusiasm was replaced in LaForge with a casual happiness. The lieutenant was doing what he loved doing, and what he was particularly good at. When they returned to engineering, it was back to duty, especially since both the captain and a shuttle had gone missing. Obviously, Duffy said in a stage whisper to Kornblum, that hot chocolate that Gomez ordered was actually a gateway to another dimension and it sucked the captain in before he could change his uniform. Before Sonya could say anything, Denny walked up. Hey, come on, leave her alone, Duff. Come on, it's a joke. She understands, right? Smiling, Sonya looked at Duffy. Actually, the hot chocolate was really a special acidic compound that only attacks people of the rank of lieutenant or higher. So watch it, or I'll spill it on you too. Everyone laughed at that. Sonya felt like someone lifted the world off her shoulders as she realized they were laughing with her rather than at her. Honestly, Cornwell said, that wouldn't be the weirdest thing that happened on this ship. Remember when that captain got sucked into that energy cloud that killed Singh? Or when that duplicate captain from the future showed up? Duffy added. Or when that Ferengi controlled his mind and trapped him on the Stargazer? Cornwell said. Or Q. What's a Q? Denny asked. Alright, that's enough. That was LaForge walking over from the main engineering console. We just heard from the bridge. The captain's back. Sonya frowned. What do you mean, back? LaForge shrugged. All I can say is the shuttlecraft's back in the bay and the captain's in 10 forward. Sonya shook her head in confusion. Does this count as something exciting? Chuckling, LaForge said, if it is, it slipped by me too. The engineers all went back to work. Sonya saw that the antimatter containment unit needed a bit of an adjustment. She worked on that for a little while until the warp core activated. What the hell? The readout said that the helm was inactive and that they were moving at quarter impulse, as they had been since the search for the captain had ceased. Yet the warp core was pounding away as if the ship were at warp 9. LaForge was by her side in an instant. What's happening? I don't know. From behind her, Kornblum said, Sir, according to the velocity meter, we're traveling at warp 22. That's impossible, Sonya said. Yeah, well, so's the captain disappearing and reappearing, LaForge muttered, but they both fit the MO of somebody I really didn't want to see again. The next few hours would, Sonya knew, live in her nightmares for the rest of her life. The somebody LaForge didn't want to see was Q. Though Denny didn't recognize the entity, Sonya did, from her studying of the Enterprise's missions while at the Academy. He, if the masculine pronoun even truly applied, was a fantastically powerful creature who'd toyed with the ship twice before, including on her maiden voyage. Now he'd sent the Enterprise to the Delta Quadrant, several thousand light years from the Federation, right in the path of a species known as the Borg. Sonya had said she wanted to be here seeing things no human had seen before, and she got a hard lesson in the cliché about being careful what you wish for. The Borg ship had attacked the Enterprise, carving out portions of 3 decks, costing the ship 18 people. During the frantic repair cycle in engineering, LaForge had to keep her on track, as she found herself unable to wrap her mind around the fact that 18 people, some of whom she probably knew, were dead. The Yamato had been bad enough, but she didn't know anybody there. What if one of the casualties is Leanne? Or Ella? Or... LaForge, bless him, had kept her in line. We'll have time to grieve later. Right now, let's get those shields up. Sonya had hoped that later would be in her quarters. Eventually, Q had taken pity on them and sent them back home to the Alpha Quadrant before the Borg could destroy them. LaForge had let Alpha Shift, who had stayed on well into Beta, go. Sonya had gone to her cabin only to find Leanne crying. One of the 18 people lost to the Borg ship was Suntek Han. Finding herself unable to say anything comforting to Leanne, and respecting her desire to be left alone, Sonya instead went to the one place where she had felt comfortable since coming on board the Enterprise. While sitting in 10 forward, Watching the stars go by as they flew towards Starbase 83 for repairs, Sonya heard a voice. Surprised to see you here. She looked up to see Kieran Duffy, but said nothing. Looking down at her drink, Duffy smirked and asked, That's not hot chocolate, is it? The clear glass had an equally clear liquid in it, so Sonya knew the lieutenant was simply teasing. Tequila, actually. My papi always kept a bottle of Patron Anejo for special occasions, which usually meant he only took it out when somebody died. I couldn't think of anything better to order. Yeah. Duffy himself was cradling what looked like a beer or ale or some such. Both were, of course, synthaholic. Enterprise policy was that its crew was expected to stick with synthahol where at all possible. Besides, Sonya really didn't want to get drunk. She tended to lose control with alcohol, and she had enough control problems as it was. Realizing how uncomfortable it was having Duffy hover over her, Sonya said, Have a seat, Lieutenant. Unless you're scared I'll spill the tequila on you. Duffy chuckled. Thanks. And I'm not worried about that. Unless you meant what you said before about the acid. No. Sonya threw back some tequila. While the synthahol version didn't get her drunk, it didn't have the same burning sensation as it went down the throat either, which Sonya found herself missing. You okay? He asked. Not really. Sonya let out a long breath and shook her head. I just can't get it right in my head, you know? 18 people just gone. After taking a sip of his ale, Duffy asked, You ever have Commander Schoenhertz at the Academy? Well, it's Captain Schoenhertz, but yeah. She got promoted. Good for her. Duffy started turning his ale glass in place. Well, remember what she used to say? Sonya wondered how old Duffy was if his Academy days were long enough ago that Schoenhertz was still a commander. He's still a JG. Excuse me. And he's still a JG? That didn't speak well for his career prospects. Aloud, she said, Space is mean. Yep, except that's not really it. Space isn't mean, because that implies malice. What space is uncaring. It's a brutal environment, but it's not a nasty one, because it's not trying to kill you, it's just the way it is. All we can do is work with it best we can. He smiled. That's why I like to fly. You're a pilot. No, I mean fly. My uncle got me a pair of gravity boots for my birthday when I was a teenager. I loved those things. Didn't stop using them until I hurt myself. Sonya winced. What happened? Shrugging, Duffy said, It zigged when I should have zagged. He got a faraway look in his eyes. I should dig them out. Try them on the holodeck. What's the holodeck like, Lieutenant? Hey, come on. We're off duty, Ensign. It's Kieran. Sonya. Good. And you haven't been on the holodeck yet? She looked down at her drink. Haven't had the time. That's crazy. Last time I checked, humans only needed 8 hours of sleep, and each shift is only 8 hours. That leaves 8 hours to do whatever you want. You haven't been on the holodeck? Sonya looked up. It's not that simple. I have to keep up with the journals and work extra shifts sometimes, and... Duffy got a confused look on his face. LaForge isn't making you do this, is he? That isn't his style. She looked down at the drink. Not really. Trust me, Sonya, you don't need to beat yourself to a pulp. LaForge is a good guy, and he's obviously taken an interest in you. That's a good sign, really. The lieutenant has pretty high standards. Makes you wonder what he sees in me, to be honest. I'm sure that's not true, Sonya said meekly, though she had to admit to have been thinking the same thing. He's kind of stuck with me. I was part of the original Shakedown crew. I served under McDougal, Argyle, Logan, and Lynch before LaForge got the promotion. And I really don't want to go anywhere else. This is a great ship. Well, that's true. They kept talking for a while after that, through another drink each, and Sonya found herself unable to recall the specifics of the conversation, but she did feel a lot better when it was over. When he tossed back the last of his second ale, Duffy got up. I gotta go. People to do, things to see. It was nice talking to you, Sonya. Same here, Sonya said with a smile. Thanks, Kieran. You're welcome. Chapter 5. Captain's Log. Stardate 42923.4. Despite misgivings, I have agreed to Starfleet's request that the Enterprise divert to the Braslota system to take part in a war game exercise. Joining us as observer and mediator is the Zakdorn Master Strateger, Sina Kolran. Hey there, HC! Sonya gritted her teeth at Kornblum's greeting as she entered main engineering. For months, the nickname had modulated from Ensign Hot Chocolate to Ensign HC, and now to simply HC. Never mind the fact that she hadn't touched the stuff since her now infamous encounter with Captain Picard. Never mind the fact that she'd been responsible for implementing Commander Riker's plan to save LaForge from Pakleds who kidnapped them, thus saving her CO's life and earning herself a commendation. Never mind the fact that she'd taken up Earl Grey tea, the captain's favorite drink, as penance. The nickname remained. Even in 10 Forward, people greeted her thusly. The only exceptions were the fellow members of the corner office, as it had come to be named. Trying to take the advice given to her by Leon, Geordi, and Kieran to heart, Sonya had finally taken her roommate up on her offer to join the group of friends in 10 Forward for drinks. The rest of the group included Tess Allenby, who served as a shuttle pilot and the backup con officer for both Beta and Gamma shifts, Gar Costa and Helga Van Mater, both fellow Alpha Shift engineers, and later, at Sonya's own urging, Denny Russell. They took up the port-side corner table. Guinan, 10 Forward's enigmatic host, often had their drinks ready before they arrived. For Sonya, it was Earl Grey, and other people generally knew not to sit there. "You hear the scuttlebutt, HC?" Kornblum asked her now in engineering. Sighing, Sonya said, "If you mean about Lieutenant Worf and that Klingon emissary on the holodeck, yes, I did hear." And she wished she hadn't. Klingon sex was one of those things about which she felt it was better to live in blissful ignorance. "Nah, that's old news. I mean about the Hathaway. I hear LaForge will be taking some people over there for the war game." "Really?" Sonya now noticed Riker was in engineering talking to LaForge about something. "Isn't Commander Riker commanding the ship for the exercise?" Kornblum nodded. "Wouldn't that be great?" "I don't see why. It's an 80-year-old ship. What possible use could there be in crawling around an old wreck like that?" "Oh, I don't know. Sounds like an engineer's dream." Sonya shuddered. "More like a nightmare. I studied some of those old matter-antimatter systems at the Academy. It's embarrassingly primitive. Plus, they couldn't recrystallize their dilithium back then. It was a mess." "Well, I hope you like cleaning up messes then, Ensign." Whirling around, Sonya saw that LaForge had come up behind her without her noticing. "Sir? Commander Riker's asked me to come along in the Hathaway and asked me to pick the engineers. You were at the top of my list." "Oh, thank you, sir." Her first thought with this was not what she had in mind when she signed on. She wanted to seek out new life, not seek out something that was abandoned 80 years ago, with good reason. But she trained her mouth over the last few months to not put her first thoughts into words. Sometimes it even worked. "There'll be a mission briefing here in 2 hours." "I'll be there, sir." After LaForge walked off, Kornblum winced. "I'm sorry, Sonya. I jinxed it for you, didn't I?" Thinking back to an embarrassed captain saying, "Yes, Ensign, it's all over me," Sonya sighed and said, "It's not your fault, Bernie. I've been jinxed since I walked aboard this ship." Sonya had been staring at the console innards for a full minute. 41 Enterprise crew had beamed over to the 80-year-old Constellation-class Hathaway, led by Commander Riker, or, rather, Captain Riker. For the duration of this mission, he was in command of the Hathaway, and so was properly referred to as Captain. The mission specs called for a complement of 40, but Riker had asked for Wesley Crusher to come along for educational study. Staring at the underside of the console, where LaForge had sent her once he got the lights working in engineering, Sonya was grateful for Wes's presence, as they were going to need all the help they could get. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring at the unfamiliar duotronic components, and wondering how the hell they flew through space in the 23rd century with this garbage. In a shipwide announcement, Riker had said that they wouldn't be getting much sleep, and Sonya could see why. Even if nobody slept and worked double time, she doubted they could get this wreck going in the 2 days they had. To make matters worse, Sonya felt like a fifth wheel. LaForge had presumably taken her along for her expertise in antimatter, but the Hathaway was warp inactive, with no antimatter on board to power a warp drive. Even if they had antimatter, there was no dilithium either, just some chips of crystals that were the less refined variety one got in the 23rd century when recrystallization wasn't possible. "Something wrong, Sonya?" Sonya looked up to see Helga Van Mater standing over her. The brunette was holding a tool Sonya didn't recognize at first. "Is that a magnospanner?" She hadn't seen one of those since she was a plebe. Helga nodded. "Yeah, I need it for the manifolds. What's the matter here? Can't you get the plasma flow going?" "You kidding? I'm afraid to touch it." "Why?" She waved her arms. "Look at it! I can't even find the Shangay shunt." Helga laughed. "There isn't one." Sonya's eyes went wide. "How can there not be a Shangay shunt?" "Well, mostly by virtue of Shangay not inventing the thing until 65 years ago. Besides, all the shunt does is speed up the reaction time and make it easier to diagnose flaws. It's not like you really need it to run the ship." That went counter to everything Sonya had been taught. In fact, she remembered Professor Naharodny going on at some length about how if you lost your Shangay shunt, you might as well blow the ship up. "Look," Helga said, I need to tune up the manifolds. When I'm done, I can walk you through this if you want." No, that's okay," Sonya said quickly. Helga had her own duties to perform, and Sonya was tired of people covering for her. I'll figure this out. You sure? Sighing, Sonya said, not really, but I'm going to do it anyhow. Helga smiled. Good, because the manifold's going to take at least 3 hours. She walked off. Letting out another sigh, Sonya went back to peering at the inside of the console. Four hours later, Sonya was grinning from ear to ear. Helga, it turned out, had been right. All the shunt did was streamline the impulse drive. She doped out the entire system and figured out what needed repairing, what needed replacing, and what couldn't be repaired or replaced but still worked around. LaForge came up to her at almost a dead run. Sonya, just the person I'm looking for. Clambering to her feet, Sonya brushed several locks of hair out of her face and wiped sweat from her brow with her sleeve. Holding up the pad she'd been taking notes on, she said, I've done it, Geordi. We'll have full impulse as soon as... That's great, Sonya, but we need you for something else. Sonya blinked. But if the impulse drive... Did you do up a schedule like I asked? She stared down at the pad. The haphazard notes she doodled could, she supposed, be translated into something resembling a schedule. Sort of? Give it to Costa and Sherman. I need you at the core. Again, Sonya blinked. Geordi, the warp core is inactive. Just come with me, Sonya, okay? Sonya shook her head. Okay, I'll be right there. She looked around, saw Gar Costa, handed him the pad, then walked off. Criminy, HC, is this even in English? Gar asked, but Sonya ignored him, walked over to where LaForge and Wesley were working with some kind of widget that was hooked up to where the antimatter injectors would be, were there any antimatter. When Wesley moved out of the way, Sonya saw the widget more clearly, and realized it was a module designed to channel high-energy plasma reactions with antimatter. She also realized that she'd seen it before, and not on the Hathaway. Isn't that your plasma physics homework, Wes? Smiling sheepishly, Wesley said, It was. Now it's our best shot at warp drive, LaForge said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I need you to calculate the best thermal curve to give us a controlled reaction. And then what? Sonya asked. She'd been thinking purely in terms of impulse engines for several hours, so it took her a second to reboot her brain, as it were. She ran over the specs of the module from what Wesley had told her. She also wondered how the hell he smuggled it over here, since they weren't supposed to bring things over from the Enterprise. If they could have, Sonya would have brought a Shanghai shunt and saved 3.5 hours of her life. That thing doesn't have more than a few micrograms of antimatter, right? She asked Wesley. He nodded. You think the chips we have will be enough to channel the reaction? LaForge shrugged. If it doesn't, we're stuck at impulse, which is where we were in the first place. But the Enterprise won't be expecting it. They won't be expecting us to blow up, either. Sonya grinned. But it should work, yeah. I'll get right on it. Good. She went over to a computer terminal to start working up the equations. Then she stopped. Captain Riker did okay this, right? Both LaForge and Wesley said, right! A little too quickly. Okay. This once she was more than willing to let someone else take the heat. By the time they were 2 hours out of the simulation, Sonya was ready to cry. The impulse engines were up and running as expected. Gar said that once we translated your notes, the schedule was spot on. The problem was that the control systems they had available to them were limited, especially since they had to adapt components from the impulse drive in order to accommodate Wesley's module, which meant that the impulse drive and warp drive components were doing double duty instead of being separated as usual. It's only a simulation, LaForge said, and it's only for a couple hours. Even the duotronic circuits can probably handle double duty. That's not the problem, Wesley said. He had that open-mouthed expression of his that Sonya had learned meant that he was scared he was going to get yelled at. LaForge folded his arms. So what is the problem? Sonya picked it up. We're still not 100% sure the warp drive will work right. We've only got enough antimatter for a short warp 1 jump, and a lot of these components are old and worn out. They haven't been used or maintained in 80 years, and they're not as adaptive as our tech is now. The worry, Wesley said, is that we're going to overload the control systems, at which point the impulse and warp drive will both shut down. LaForge sighed. Great. Sir, Wesley said with a pained look at Sonya, I know you signed off on this because if it didn't work, we'd still have impulse power. So if you want it, Wes, we can't give up now. We've already hooked everything up. He sighed. All right, the captain will be down in an hour for a status report. I want to quintuple check everything. Wes, you look over the crystals in the reaction chamber. Sonya, you do the injectors. I'll handle the control circuits. Let's move it, people. Sonya went to check the injectors. She ran every diagnostic she could think of, then realized that the standard diagnostic she was used to didn't take everything to account. Like, she thought with a dark smile, the lack of a Shanghai shunt. She found herself rewriting the diagnostics, which was nice, which was wise, as she found 4 programming flaws and 1 bad hookup that she would have missed otherwise. As she knelt behind the warp core, realigning the injector after fixing the bad hookup, she heard Riker's voice booming out over engineering. The simulation begins in 1 hour. You'll have warp drive, Captain, LaForge said, though it may not be what you expected. That's the understatement of the decade, Sonya thought. I think that deserves some kind of explanation. We'll have warp 1 for... Wesley cut in. Just under 2 seconds. Sonya thought that was generous. 1.4 was her best guess, but Wesley seemed to think he minimized the excess flow of the antimatter. That's not enough for an escape, Riker said thoughtfully, but used as a surprise, it may give us a strategic advantage. Sir, LaForge said, all of this is theoretical. And if your theory fails to pay off? Here it comes, Sonya thought as she fit the injector back in. Have you ever driven a Grentham and water hopper? Sure. Ever popped the clutch? Sonya barked out a laugh and almost dropped her tools. One of the things she loved about LaForge was his way of explaining things. Given half a chance, Sonya would babble for half an hour in jargon before even getting to the interesting part. With 2 questions, LaForge had conveyed the appropriate information to Riker without getting overly technical. You're saying we're going to stall the Hathaway? With remarkable calm, Wesley put in, and the Enterprise will waltz right over and pulverize us. Sonya walked out from behind the warp core with a nod to LaForge. Riker smiled at her. Ensign Gomez? Captain Riker? It's going well, I hope. I think so, and I've learned a lot. These old ships have a lot of fascinating technology. It's impressive, really. They have no Chang'e shunts, duotronic circuitry, dilithium crystals that break down, no EPS conduits, no isolinear chips, and I'm babbling again, aren't I? The last was added when Riker broke into what only could be described as an indulgent smile. That's all right, Ensign. As long as you keep the hot chocolate out of the engine room, we should be fine. Carry on. Sonya let out a long breath through her teeth. An hour later, Sonya sat in engineering, working up a new diagnostic program while keeping an eye on the engines. The wargame scenario had gone rather badly. Lieutenant Worf had hacked into the Enterprise security computer and tricked them into thinking a Romulan warbird was attacking. In the confusion, the Hathaway got several dozen simulated hits on the Enterprise. Then, just when LaForge had run into engineering to tell Sonya to help him and Wesley implement the warp jump, a Ferengi warship, the Krikta, showed up and attacked the Enterprise. The latter vessel was unshielded since its tactical systems were in simulation mode for the wargame, and so was especially vulnerable. Transporter and weapons were down. The daemon in charge had given the Enterprise 10 minutes to give up the Hathaway, which they had erroneously concluded to be a prize of value to the Enterprise in order for the Galaxy-class ship to be firing on it. LaForge and Wesley had gone back to the bridge to talk to the Enterprise. LaForge had left Sonya in charge of engineering, telling her in no uncertain terms to make sure the warp drive worked, as it was now likely their only means of escape from the Krikta. Now she was monitoring the conversation between the 2 ships. Data was speaking at the moment. Premise. The Ferengi wish to capture the Hathaway, believing it to be of value. Therefore, we must remove the ship from their field of interest. Kolrami, the Zach Dorn observer and moderator, spoke up. And they will soon relocate it after a 2-second warp jump. 1.4, Sonya muttered. She still didn't think Wesley's module had enough antimatter for 2 whole seconds. There is a way, Picard said. Number 1, can you hear this? Yes, sir, Riker said. We're all here, waiting for you to pull another rabbit out of your hat. Gar, she said to Costa, check over the inertial dampeners. With this warp drive, the last thing we want is to lose that or gravity. Right, wouldn't want to escape the Ferengi just to go splat on the bulkheads. Gar ran off to check that. Mr. Data? Picard prompted. The android said, on the captain's command, we will fire 4 photon torpedoes directly at the Hathaway. They actually have torpedoes, that's something, Sonya thought as she finished off the diagnostic program. Data went on. 1 millisecond after its detonation, the computer will trigger your warp jump. Sonya started running the program, then immediately opened up a new program file on the terminal in front of her. This is going to work. We're going to need to get this cranky old computer to do it. LaForge said, I think I hate this plan. Data, we're not even sure our warp jump will work. If the warp engines fail to function, Data said, the results will be unfortunate. Very unfortunate. We will be dead. That was Worf, as ever, the voice of bluntness. Sonya, however, was pretty sure she could do it. She'd spent 2 days navigating these silly old duotronics, and she was fairly confident she could make them tap dance if she had to. Tying the warp drive execution into the detection of a torpedo explosion was something she should be able to do. Captain Riker, I cannot order you to do this, Picard said, which struck Sonya as remarkably generous. Were she in Picard's place, she wasn't sure she'd stop short of giving that order. What the hell? Riker sounded rather morbid. Nobody said life was safe. Sonya looked around and saw that Chowan Aliakala was sitting nervously. Chowan, I need a fresh set of eyes on this. Looking almost relieved, Chowan came over and eyeballed Sonya's pad. Picard's voice sounded over the speakers. The advantage is that it will appear from the Krikta's perspective, as though you were destroyed in the explosion. As she read over the program, Chowan muttered, "Once, of course, we are destroyed in the explosion. We'll be okay," Sonya said. To her own surprise, she believed it. "I hope you're right, Sonya." Chowan, for her part, didn't sound like she did. Worf said, "That will deceive them only for a few minutes. Their sensors will soon locate us." "We only need a few minutes, Mr. Worf," Riker said, "because you're going to prepare another little surprise for them." That confused Sonya. She knew that Worf could get into the Enterprise computer by virtue of being the ship's chief of security. I guess he has an equal facility for Ferengi computers. Chuckling to herself, she thought they probably get their security protocols on the cheap anyhow. Chowan said, "I'm not sure about the timing. I'd go for 1.5 milliseconds just to play it safe." "We can't fine-tune it that much," Sonya said. "Besides, Data's the one who said 1 millisecond. You're going to doubt him?" "Then we're agreed," Picard said on the speaker. "On my mark. 4 minutes. Data added, "Remember, Geordi, if the implementation is off by 1 millisecond, the Hathaway will not survive." Sonya gave Chowan a C look. The other engineer simply shrugged. Sounding more worried than Sonya had ever heard him, even during the Borg attack, LaForge said, "Data, that's the one part of this plan we're all absolutely sure about." 1 minute later, LaForge and Wesley entered engineering. Both Sonya and Denny Russell walked up to them with pads in hand. LaForge looked right at Sonya. "Tell me the warp drive's okay." Handing him the pad, she said, "Okay, and already programmed to go off when the Enterprise tries to blow us up per Mr. Data's plan." Briefly, LaForge smiled. "Bless you, Sonya. What have you got, Russell?" Denny held up his pad display. "I've plotted a course that minimizes the risk of gravitational fluctuations from either Breslota or the planet when we go to warp. With your permission, I'll send this to Ensign McKnight on the bridge." "Do it." He walked over to the core. "Let's get this party started." Wesley went over to the injector control systems, Sonya right next to him. The kid looked nervous as hell. "I hope this works." "If it does, we owe it to you, Wes," Sonya said. "If you hadn't smuggled that thing over, we'd be stuck. And if it doesn't work, the Enterprise will blow us up." Sonya shrugged. "Like the captain said, nobody said life was safe." "Yeah, but with these old control systems and the duotronic circuits..." "Hey, don't count the Hathaway out. There's some life in these old circuits." Wes smiled. "Weren't you the one who was afraid to touch anything 2 days ago, HC?" Pointing an accusatory finger, Sonya said, "Don't you start with the HC. And, well, let's just say I've been converted." Sonya had only been half listening to the monitored communications between the Enterprise and the Krikta, but then she heard Picard say, "You believe the Hathaway has value? We deny you your prize. Fire!" "Here it comes." Sonya held her breath. The ship rocked for a second. "Damn it, Gar," Sonya thought. "You were supposed to fix the inertial dampeners if they weren't working," but then steadied. Then the walls seemed to stretch for a second. Looking down, Sonya saw that her hands were doing the same thing. It looked similar to the visual distortion of the stars one saw at warp speeds, but of the ship, not what was outside it. Looking over at Wesley, she saw that his face was also distorted, like it was in a funhouse mirror. But oddly, Sonya didn't feel any pain. Then everything snapped back to normal. This time there was no jerking of the ship. Good work, Gar. She checked the display. "Warp speed operational for 1.9 seconds. She looked over at Wes. "You were right." Now Wesley was grinning ear to ear. "Looks like I was, yeah." When they arrived in 10 Forward, the corner office already had an Earl Grey tea, a green tea, a synthaholic scotch, a birch beer, a synthahol bitters, and a Ractigino sitting in front of each place. Leanne raised her green tea as they all took a seat and said, "To Ensigns Gomez, Costa, Van Mater, and Russell for earning commendations on the Hathaway." "Hear, hear," Tess Allenby said, hoisting her scotch. She and Leanne were the only ones from the corner office who hadn't been assigned to Captain Riker, though they had been sent to the battle bridge after the Ferengi attacked, in case the Enterprise needed to do an emergency saucer separation. They all sipped from their drinks and cheered. "You all did amazing work," Leanne said. "Everybody's talking about it." Denny shrugged as he swallowed his birch beer. "Just another day at the office." "Come on," Tess said. "Doing what you did with an 80-year-old ship? I'm amazed the thing didn't fall apart when you blew on it." "Don't be so sure," Helga said. "Those old systems will surprise you, right, Sonya?" Grinning at her Earl Grey, Sonya said, "Yeah, okay, so I took a little while to get the hang of it." "More than a little while," Helga said conspiratorially. All right, more than a little while. But we did it, didn't we? We made a warp drive, and we beat the Ferengi." Gar held his Ractigino near his face, as if ready to sip it at a moment's notice. "We made a warp drive with spit and baling wire." "And the Crusher Kids experiment," Helga added. Tess made a face. "Not that little twerp again." Sonya was surprised by the vehemence of her reaction. "Tess? Look, Sonya, I know he's your friend, but, I mean, come on, he's a kid. He hasn't taken one class at the academy, and Picard's got him doing Alpha shift con duties. I'm never going to get on the bridge during Alpha as long as he's on the ship, especially if he keeps pulling miracles like this. Tess, Sonya hesitated. She'd really grown to like Wes over the past few months, but she hadn't realized the acting ensign's position might have had a deleterious effect on the not-so-acting ensigns. Look, it's okay. You should say something to Riker, Helga said. He's a good guy. Oh, please. He's the one in charge of the kid's education. What do you think put him in charge of that mineral survey in Drama? The worst thing I can do is complain to Riker about his precious boy genius. An uncomfortable silence descended over the corner office. Just for a second before Gar said, Hey, I hear LaForge is doing rotations again. He's putting Kieran on warp diagnostics. He waggled his eyebrows at Sonya. So you two can flirt all shift. Sonya almost spit her tea. What? Leanne gave Sonya an accusatory look. Flirting? With Lieutenant Duffy? Sonya, you didn't tell me. We are not flirting. Could have fooled me, Denny muttered. Don't you start, she said with a glower at her classmate. Hey, I wasn't the one giggling during the maintenance cycle. Tess shot her a look. Giggling? Sonya sighed. He told a funny joke. The law of averages was bound to catch up to him eventually, and he'd say something funny. I was just being polite. During a maintenance cycle, Denny deadpan. Look, and then there was that time during the Mariposa mission, Gar said. And when you two were on the damage control team when that old Klingon ship attacked, Helga added. And when, all right, Sonya said, interrupting Denny, maybe we were flirting. A little. For very large values of little, Denny muttered. But that's all it is. I'm not interested in Kieran Duffy. He's not nearly as funny as he thinks he is. In fact, nobody's as funny as he thinks he is. And besides, he's still a JG. He's been in Starfleet for years. And that's as far as he's gotten. That's a classic case of career dead-endedness. So? Leanne said. Sonya hesitated. She stared at Leanne for a second. All her reasons were true, of course, but that wasn't the overriding factor. She had, over the past month, taken it easy and allowed herself to have a social life. But she hadn't taken the next step with Kieran Duffy for one simple reason. She didn't want to go through what Leanne went through when the Borg attack took Suntech from her. Tess used Sonya mentioned of her career dead-endedness to rant about Wesley again, which in turn led to Denny speculating about his parents, which led to Leanne and Helga telling Sonya, Denny, and Tess about Beverly Crusher, which led to a discussion of Dr. Pulaski and her transporter phobia, and soon nobody was talking about Tess's bitterness or Sonya's love life, which suited Sonya just fine. To be continued next week. Thank you very much for watching. Check me out online at DeCandido.net. Read my blog at DeCandido.wordpress.com. Support me on Patreon at patreon.com/KRAD. Please wear a mask, get vaccinated, and stay safe. I'll see you next week.